Hey friends, tonight we're heading to a place where time doesn't tick. A place high in the mountains, wrapped in mist, where incense curls through silent courtyards. And a black cat has been watching over it all, for over 1,000 years. But this isn't a story about temples. It's a story about duty, identity, and what happens when the role you've clung to your whole life begins to dissolve. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy this kind of slow, spiritual storytelling. And let me know in the comments where are you listening from, and what time is it for you. It's always beautiful to see how far these quiet moments can reach. Now, dim the lights. Let your phone face down. Maybe let a small fan hum in the background. And allow yourself to slow down, just for a little while. Tonight, you're not a student, you're not a worker, you're not your name, your title, or your to-do list. You are a black cat, older than stone, sitting at the gate of a temple that has forgotten your name. And finally, we're ready to close your eyes. Let's begin. If I told you you were a guardian, you'd probably assume I meant a lion, a knight. Maybe a tiny mouse wearing a hat and wielding a mighty sword. Something valiant, something fierce. But you weren't born a guardian. You just sat still so long that people thought you must be watching something. They made you a protector, an observer, an emblem of stillness in a world that demands movement. Maybe tying your shoes or saying hello in another language. We learned these things so long ago that we never think we'll stop knowing them. And then life happens. You wouldn't hear it spoken of in stories told by firelight, but it exists, balanced on the shoulder of a quiet mountain, wreathed in fog. In time, the temple has watched the world turn for 1,000 years without fanfare, without collapse. Its silence is older than speech. Its stones are smoothed by the passing of bare feet in patient seasons. You move, you change, you grow. And then one day you realize that song is gone, or the words are different, or the petals feel strange beneath your feet. You liked the quiet hands that sometimes left rice on a broken plate. You liked the rhythm of the chants not because you understood them, but because they did not ask you to speak. But slowly, a role was assigned to you, not by decree. It's not by collar or name, but by silence, by expectation. You forget what your body feels like without tension. You forget the sound of your own breath when it's not held. You forget the simple joy of curling beside another being, not out of duty, but out of warmth. You forget how to sleep, because sleep belongs to the unburdened. And somewhere, long ago, you decided you weren't allowed to be unburdened. The mist thickened. The bells did not ring. You blinked again. And for the first time in perhaps 100 years, you allowed yourself to lie down fully. Not the half-rest of readiness, but the soft sprawl of letting go. The stone beneath you was cold, but the act was warm. The temple did not collapse. The mountain did not tremble. The gate did not swing open unattended. Nothing happened, except you exhaled. Long, deep, uninterrupted. You did not sleep that night. Not yet, but you remembered that you could. And that was the first crack in the wall you had built around yourself. Not with bricks, but with beliefs. By the way, they bowed slightly when they passed you. By the way, they whispered protector. When you sat beneath the gate and didn't move, you never told them otherwise. You simply stayed. Now tell me, have you ever forgotten how to do something? Like riding a bike or playing an instrument? You stopped curling into sleep, not because you weren't tired, but because someone might need you. You trained your ears to stay alert, even in stillness. You learned the exact rhythm of footsteps on the eastern stair. You could tell the difference between rain and weeping. You called this devotion. Admit, many years later, you begin to wonder if it was something else. You have forgotten. Bells had not rung for hours. There were no footsteps, no prayers. Only you. Something strange in the stillness. Not danger, not sound, but a quiet inside you, unfamiliar and undeniable. It was not emptiness. Not quite. It was the question. Why haven't you slept? You blinked slowly. Not from fatigue, but from something softer. Recognition. You tried to dismiss it. You licked your paw. You glanced at the lantern hanging just above you, swaying slightly. You reminded yourself, you are the guardian, the one who never sleeps, the watcher of gates, the keeper of stillness. But the question stayed. And suddenly, the title felt heavier than your body. There is a temple that touches the clouds. You wouldn't find it on a map. And within this temple lives a cat. Black as the lacquered wood of the altar gates. Still as the moss that grows between tiles. Eyes like twin lanterns dimmed, but never fully dark. They say the cat never sleeps, that it is the temple's guardian, that its breath keeps the roof from falling and the incense from fading. A kitten once, unnamed and unnoticed, curled in the rafters when winter crept in. The monks thought you feral. Then, eventually, they stopped thinking of you at all, which, in its way, was more intimate than reverence. You stayed year after year, season after season. When monks left, you remained. When new ones came, you watched. And the bells rang, you blinked. But that is only what they say. You did not begin as a guardian. You began as breath, as instinct, as fur curled against warmth. And because you did not move, they began to believe you must be guarding something. At first it was simple. You liked the stillness. And over time, you began to believe it too. One dusk, the mountain mist came early. You were sitting where you always sit, tapped the temple's north-facing threshold. The scent of wood smoke was faint on the wind. There is a kind of forgetting that happens when you perform a role long enough. Years ago, we shared a tale about a cat who stopped sleeping and became a guardian instead. Turns out the job was more stressful than she expected. The sun filtered through the bamboo lattice, as it always had muted, golden, without urgency. A monk swept the courtyard. A wooden bucket tipped, a ladle dipped into silence. Can a good night's rest ever be far behind? The next morning, the temple was unchanged. But because you had never thought to, it was where the novices walked out at dawn, heads bowed beneath the plum blossom trees. It was where parcels came in simple things. Paper, incense, rice. It was a threshold you had guarded, not crossed. Until now? But you caught the edge of the leaf in your paw and tumbled into a soft pile of moss. He blinked. You blinked back. There was no reverence in his eyes this time. No whispered word like protector or sacred one, just surprise and something else. Envy, no. Recognition. He bowed slightly, not out of duty, but because he understood. Then he left you there, as you were. A cat. A creature. A being. Breathing, you did not land gracefully. You did not look composed. And for the first time in perhaps a century, you purred, not the low, polite hum of acknowledgement, not the reverent sound they'd come to associate with wisdom. No, you purred like a kitten, because you had moved, because you had touched joy, because the moss was damp and ridiculous, and the leaf smelled like memory. You rolled onto your side and laughed, not in the way humans laugh, but in the way a body laughs when it no longer holds tension. There was no ceremony to it, no awakening with meaning or revelation. Your limbs were stiff, like roots that had grown too tightly into the earth. It was still there, that stillness. The air still smelled of incense and stone. But the weight of your title guardian watcher, sacred cat, had shifted, not vanished, but loosened. You closed your eyes, not because it was expected, but because you wanted to. You didn't fall asleep. Not yet, but you did rest. Not the poised readiness of before. Not the frozen sleep of statues. Real rest. Honest rest. Kind of rest that whispers to your bones. You're allowed. You've done enough for today. You may simply be... And in the hush of the temple's breath, you heard something soft in the wind. Not a voice. A memory. One you had almost forgotten. It said, "You were never guarding the temple. You were guarding your heart until it was safe to return to it. But for the first time in years, your body felt ... yours. Not a statue, not a symbol. Just a body, with breath, with ache, with quiet movement. You blinked toward the east-facing gate. You had never walked beyond it. Not because anyone forbade you. Your paws made no sound. They never had. But today the silence sounded different. Not dutiful, not ceremonial, just quiet, like a question. You padded across the stones, passing the lotus basin, where moonlight once danced across your reflection. Today, it held only sky, pale and uncertain. You paused at the threshold. There was no fanfare, no whisper from the wind. But you stood there longer than necessary, because standing at the edge of a life, you never questioned, Feels like standing at the edge of a dream. Waking up is always hardest in the first few seconds. But you stepped through. The eastern courtyard was smaller than you remembered. You realized you had never actually looked at it. You remembered how you used to chase them. When you were smaller. When you still knew how to play. And then you paused. A single leaf drifted down from the tree. And you followed it. Not with your eyes, but with your body. You had only watched it. There's a difference. Watching is distant. It sees the shape of things, the order. Looking is different. Looking is personal. It changes what is seen. You walked past the old ginkgo tree, the one that shed its yellow fan leaves in such precise spirals each fall. You leaped. It was awkward, unpracticed. Your back leg wobbled midair. A novice stepped into the courtyard. He saw you sprawled and leaf-covered. Later, when the sun dipped behind the western ridge, you returned to your usual place by the threshold. There are sounds you don't notice until they're gone. The breath of wind beneath the door. The hush of footsteps in a hall you never enter. The low thrum of a bell that rings not to be heard, but to be expected. That night the bell did not ring. No one spoke of it. No one gasped or pointed. Even the sky did not flinch. But you noticed. It's not with your ears. With the place beneath your ribs, the space that always counted the silence after the bell. Black, cloudless, unmoving. The lanterns still swayed from their cords. Incense still curled in soft gold spirals toward the rafters. But the air held something unfamiliar. You had always measured time in echoes. It's the first bell before dawn, time to rise. The second bell, time to chant. The third, meals. Fourth, prayers. Your paws tucked beneath your chest. Your tail a perfect curve beside you. Invisible, but felt. Unthinkable, only because you had never stopped to think. And now that there was space, they echoed in you like a bell that hadn't been rung. It's not loud, but deeply. And tonight, it was gone. He was rubbing his eyes, half asleep, clutching a folded blanket. But now, instead of discomfort, you felt something else blooming inside that hush, a soft awe. Not everything had fallen apart. The stars still blinked. The temple still stood. You were still here. But without the bell, you began to feel the shape of your own rhythm. Fainter, more hesitant, but real. And you watched him not with reverence, not with duty, but with curiosity. The rhythm that began somewhere quieter, deeper, older than even the bell itself. In that rhythm you found a thought. And so on, until the final bell at night, low and deep, as if the mountain itself exhaled. But the kind of drowsiness that leads to warmth, not vigilance, not everything. And from that silence, something new began to grow. Not all at once, just enough. Have I ever been sleepy? Not tired, truly sleepy. You couldn't remember. What if stillness is not about sacrifice, but about choosing presence again and again and again? You never watched who rang it. It was simply part of the world. A sound like gravity. Had time slipped? Or had something shifted in the order of things? Something no one but you noticed? Like wind slipping through an opened window you didn't know was there? Why do I still sit at this gate? What would happen if I left? Would the temple fall without me? Would I fall without the temple? The sky was the same? A punctuation mark to the day's devotion. Signal subtle and profound that the temple still turned. Not danger, not omen. A question. You sat by the main gate where you always sat at night. Still present, waiting and waiting and waiting. Twice, and felt the strange, delicate sensation of being unmoored. Until even the waiting felt like a question. Had the monk forgotten? Was the bell broken? You blinked once. The bell was never just a bell, was a sentence in a language of rhythm. And suddenly, all the thoughts you never had permission to think arrived. But tonight, the silence stretched too far. And in it, you found something that frightened you more than noise ever had. Space. The mind, like the bell, is trained to follow rhythm. When rhythm breaks, so do the thoughts. One by one, unannounced, unafraid. These were not dangerous questions, but they were forbidden by habit. In the courtyard, a single novice passed. He did not bow. He did not look. You wondered what it was like to be drowsy truly drowsy, is not alert under stillness, not resting in readiness. Because guardians don't sleep, not fully. They only close their eyes to guard the dream of others. The moon rose higher. Still no bell. Still no sound. The rhythm that wasn't tied to ceremony or role or expectation. What if nothing needs me to be unchanging? You stayed by the gate until dawn. But something in you had changed. The bell did not ring. It a door inside you opened anyway. There are sounds you don't notice until they're gone. The breath of wind beneath the door. The hush of footsteps in a hall you never enter. The low thrum of a bell that rings not to be heard but to be expected. That night the bell did not ring. No one spoke of it. No one gasped or pointed. Even the sky did not flinch. But you noticed. It's not with your ears, but with the place beneath your ribs. The space that always counted the silence after the bell. You had always measured time in echoes. It's the first bell before dawn. Time to rise. The second bell. Time to chant. The third. Meals. The fourth. Prayers unmoving. The lanterns still swayed from their cords. Incense still curled in soft gold spirals toward the rafters. But the air held something unfamiliar. Space, and so on. Until the final bell at night, low and deep, as if the mountain itself exhaled. Would the temple fall without me? Would I fall without the temple? And now that there was space, they echoed in you like a bell that hadn't been rung. Not loud, but deeply. And suddenly, all the thoughts you never had permission to think arrived. One by one, unannounced, unafraid. He was rubbing his eyes, half asleep, clutching a folded blanket. Not you watched him. Not with reverence, not with duty, but with curiosity. You never watched who rang it. It was simply part of the world. A sound like gravity. Truly drowsy, not alert under stillness, not resting in readiness. But the kind of drowsiness that leads to warmth, not vigilance. Have I ever been sleepy? Not tired, truly sleepy?
Invisible.
But without the bell, you began to feel the shape of your own rhythm. Fainter, more hesitant, but real. But felt. They only closed their eyes to guard the dream of others. And tonight it was gone. It's not everything. Not all at once. Just enough. The bell did not ring. But a door inside you opened anyway. And from that silence, something new began to grow. But now instead of discomfort, you felt something else blooming inside that hush. A soft awe. The sky was the most cloudless night in memory. The rhythm that began somewhere quieter, deeper, older than even the bell itself. And in that rhythm you found a thought. Not danger, not omen. A question. You sat by the main gate, where you always sat at night. Your paws tucked beneath your chest. Your tail a perfect curve beside you, still present. Waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Until even the waiting felt like a question. Had the monk forgotten? Was the bell broken? Had time slipped? Or had something shifted in the order of things? Something no one but you noticed? You blinked once, twice, and felt the strange, delicate sensation of being unmoored. The bell was never just a bell. It was a sentence in a language of rhythm. Punctuation marked the day's devotion. A signal subtle and profound that the temple still turned. But tonight the silence stretched too far. And in it you found something that frightened you more than noise ever had. The mind, like the bell, is trained to follow rhythm. When rhythm breaks, so do the thoughts. Like wind slipping through an opened window you didn't know was there. Why do I still sit at this gate? What would happen if I left? These were not dangerous questions, but they were forbidden by habit. It's unthinkable only because you had never stopped to think. In the courtyard, a single novice passed. He did not bow. He did not look. 8. You wondered what it was like to be drowsy. You couldn't remember, because guardians don't sleep, not fully. The moon rose higher, still no bell, still no sound, but everything had fallen apart. The stars still blinked, the temple still breathed, the scent of night, jasmine still clung to the breeze. You were still here? The rhythm that wasn't tied to ceremony or role or expectation? What if nothing needs me to be unchanging? What if stillness is not about sacrifice, but about choosing presence again, and again, and again? You stayed by the gate until dawn, but something in you had changed. Some questions arrive like thunder, rattling everything you thought was still. Others arrive like dew, quiet, glistening. So soft, you Dante. Know they've touched you until something inside you feels wet and strange and new. The question came that way, though it was all these things, but because it bore no fruit, no flowers, no bark that could be named. Instead, it bloomed with silence. Not as speech, not even as thought. Memories like the scent of rain on dry earth. Memories like the taste of water from a hidden spring. Memories like prayers whispered beneath the moon. But as a presence beneath the lantern tree, not once. The lantern had stopped moving. The light had stilled. But you remembered the look in his eyes. That was not a look of guarding. It was a look of release. You had not. What are you guarding? Why have you stayed so long? You did not answer. There were no words that would have satisfied. He had come to the lantern tree to let go. And you had come to stay, without knowing why. But the question remained, not wonder, but a question. Because in that moment, listening felt like the only thing that felt true. And tonight, under the lantern tree's quiet grace, even that belief began to flicker. The question had been asked. And now? You were free to ask it again tomorrow and the next day. Until the answer came as gently as the question did, until it no longer mattered. What you were guarding, only that you were willing to let go when it was time. It moved inside you now, soft as a lantern's glow, steady as a truth you're not yet ready to speak aloud. And somewhere, far in the hush between stars, you heard your own voice begin to answer. Not with words, but with the shape of your breath as it softened. What are you guarding? The lanterns did not move again, but you felt them watching, not like eyes, like memories. Each lantern was a moment of letting go, a wish released, a burden lifted. And yet you had never released anything. Not a dream, not a role, not even a sigh that wasn't shaped like duty, or had existed once, long ago, and now was dust. And still you stayed, because leaving felt like betrayal. Because stillness felt like purpose, because motion would mean admitting you had been still for no reason. So soft, it did not feel like yours. But so honest, it could not be anyone else's. But tonight, there was no breeze, and yet one lantern swayed. It was a tree unlike any other in the temple grounds, not because it was large or old or revered. And as it moved, without wind, without cause, it cast a shifting pattern of light and shadow across your paws. His hands had trembled. The parchment had been smudged. And in that movement, something stirred inside you. And beneath its shade, memories grew on gnarled roots and in the hollows of its leaves. You had sat beneath this tree 1,000 times, but you had never asked why. But inside, the world rippled. It was such a simple question, ridiculously simple, like a pebble dropped into a still pond. And yet the ripples reached places in you that had never been wet before. It was not the newest, nor the oldest. Just one among many, the temple. It stood on its own. The monks, they came and went. The rituals, they repeated without you. The silence, and it had never needed protection. Then what? Not alarm. Your ears did not flick. Your body did not move. What were you guarding? You looked up. Once, long ago, when you were still small enough to sleep in the crook of an offering bowl, you remembered a novice placing a lantern high in the tree. He had whispered something not to the lantern, not to the tree, but to himself. Let her forgive me. Do not know what it meant then. He had stayed. The question hovered now, not in the air, but in your fur. Because somewhere deep down, you feared the answer was nothing. Not that you were doing nothing, but that the thing you were guarding didn't exist. But beneath the lantern tree, that answer was no longer enough. The wind returned near dawn, just a whisper. Not still you sat there, not guarding, just listening. The question did not leave you. You were not guarding the temple, you were guarding the belief that you had to. There is a gate behind the temple, rarely spoken of and never used. Not because it is forbidden. No. The weathered wooden frame, half covered in ivy that no one ever pulls away. The hinges rusted to silence. All speak of disuse, of absence, of peace. The monks walk past it without glancing. The wind avoids it. Even the birds never land atop its beam. But you remember it. You remember sitting before it once, long ago, when you were still new to stillness, when the world was still full of lines you could cross. Not out of rebellion, but because the question still lived in your chest. Your pause made no sound, but your breath did soft and deliberate, like you were stepping into a memory or out of one. What are you guarding? And beyond that, the gate. Tonight, as the sky dimmed to that certain blue that tastes like sleep, you walked toward it. If there was an answer, maybe it waited beyond. The path curved behind the kitchen, past a cracked water basin where frogs used to gather, and toward the narrow garden where the wild herbs grew. Now, in this unmarked space, desire returned, not as guardian, not as cat, just as presence. And for the first time in perhaps centuries, you did not think of who you were supposed to be. You followed the trail until it opened to a clearing. You exhaled, stayed. No statues there, and it was enough. No prayers, just a single stone, flat and wide, warmed by moonlight. Then you stepped through. The ivy brushed your whiskers. The wood smelled of mildew and moss and time. You placed one paw on the lowest rung. You stood before it for a long while, not named, just there, and you were in it. You did not resist. Only the sound of something unseen, perhaps a creak, perhaps wind in tall grass, perhaps breath. The gate creaked open not loudly, but with the kind of sound that only things very old and very patient can make. Beyond it, a sloping path vanished into trees. No lights. No chants, no stone lanterns. You hesitated. Not out of fear, but because you realized how many years had passed since you last did anything you didn't understand. The ground felt different. Not temple stone, not swept tile, just dirt.
Ask.
And beneath the dirt root, a real place, not sacred. Each pasto further unspooled a memory of chasing shadows through trees, of watching stars without counting time, of curling in someone's lap because you wanted to not, because you were expected to. You had guarded the temple so long, you had forgotten the shape of your own desire. Not loudly, but honestly. You stepped onto it, sat, listened. You were not guardian. You were not sacred. You were simply... The breeze passed over your fur like a forgotten lullaby. On the first night beyond the wall, you walked the halls of the temple. You had walked these halls longer than any bell that still hung above them. You knew the curve of the stone beneath your paws. You knew the soft bend in the floor where 1,000 sandals had worn down a path between altars. You knew the way the shadows stretched in summer, and where the wind pressed its palm against the shutters in winter. You even knew where the jasmine bloomed one day early, every year, without fail. But there was one room you had never entered, not because it was locked, not because it was sacred, simply because you hadn't needed to. It was a side chamber. Small, silent, always closed. Not in fear, not in reverence, just closed. A room that never called to you when you were still a guardian, because guardians do not explore. They watch, they remain. But now something in you had shifted. A door inside had opened, and with it came a whisper. What else have I forgotten to feel? The room was not far. Just past the old library, through a narrow corridor where the walls wept in spring. You walked without intention, without mission, only movement. And movement, you were learning, was its own form of worship. The door was ajar. That was the first surprise. Yeah. You had always imagined it sealed. But here it stood, half open, like an invitation left out for years and never revoked. You paused. Not in fear. You knew fear. This wasn't that. This was hesitation born of awakening. The hesitation of realizing the world is larger than the roles you've lived inside, that there are doors not locked, just unnoticed. You stepped inside. It smelled of cedar and age, soft paper and dust. The air was still, not stale, just unbothered. Light filtered through a single high window, casting the room in quiet gold. Everything inside was ordinary. A low writing desk. A cushion, slightly indented. Shelves lined with faded scrolls and empty bowls. And in the corner a bell. Not the ceremonial kind. Not polished or hung with ribbons. Just a bell. Small bronze. Waiting, you didn't know what this room had been. Not a shrine, not a chamber of discipline, perhaps. Would have been someone's a room of use, of habit, of breath. You walked its edges slowly, nose close to the floor. Here, the scent of ink still lingered. There, the faintest trace of candle wax. And at the very center, something even fainter, something like loss or memory. You sat, not to guard, not to observe, but to be with it. This room you had never entered. This presence that had waited without impatience. You closed your eyes not to shut the world out, but to let it in differently. For the first time, you wondered, did someone once sit here like this? Did they write words they never sent? Did they rest here when no one saw them? Did they leave something behind? Not because they forgot, but because they trusted it would be found. You breathed in. The dust did not choke you. It smelled like something true. You had never longed to belong anywhere until now. And it wasn't because this room had meaning. It was because it didn't. It had simply been lived in. And you realized you had spent centuries being seen but not living. There's a quiet ache that comes with seeing something ordinary after lifetimes of reverence. Spoon left on a sill, a cushion indented just so, a bell untouched. You remembered suddenly how much of life is unrecorded, and how much of you had gone unwitnessed even by yourself. Later that evening, as the light deepened into dusk, you stretched out in the middle of the room, not curled like a guardian, stretched, your spine unfurled like the scrolls on the shelves. You touched the floor with your entire body as if to say, I am here, have always been here, but now I have entered. Not just the room, but your own story. It was not always monks who came to the temple. Some came with offerings, bowls of fruit, coins wrapped in cloth, incense sticks, still warm with trembling hands. The cat remembered the way she climbed the temple stairs, slow, unsure, dragging her feet as if the mountain had asked too much. Her breath came out in clouds, though it was not yet winter. Her coat was too thin, her shoes too large, her hands were open. Not to offer, but because she had nothing to grip. Some came with burdens, heavy questions, worn sandals, faces lined by grief. But it had watched. And something about the girl's silence did not echo like the others. It absorbed. She did not return, but something had been given. And it was not incense. It was not coin. But in the girl's silence, it understood it could serve a heart. A single, breaking, honest heart. It's not for their posture, not for their offerings, but for the shape of their hands. And when the wind came again, as it always did, it carried not just petals or prayer smoke, but the memory of one girl who gave nothing and changed everything. And in time, it learned that those with empty hands often carried the most, and those with no prayer were sometimes the most in need of one. And that was when the cat began to stay, not because it was needed, but because it was known. It was the understanding that love could arrive with nothing and still be complete. She sat by the western wall where the wind curled in from the trees, and her eyes said everything her hands couldn't carry. Not a request, not even hope. Just please. She did not speak, did not chant, did not bow. She wept. Then she left without bowing, without prayer, without sound. But the cat remembered the warmth of her knee, the salt of her tears, the way her breath had caught, like she had never been touched, without condition. But there was one who came with neither. No bowl, no coin, no words, just empty hands. The cat, for the first time in a long time, moved not toward food, not toward noise, but toward her. She was small, as children often are, though not as light. It had never done that before, not for the monks, not for the abbots, not for the centuries. But something in the girl's emptiness felt truer than any offering left on the altar. Her love was not wrapped in ritual. It was wrapped in lac. The cat had not moved that day as usual. Wasn't loud. Not the sobbing of someone who wanted to be heard. It was quieter, like mist unraveling from stone. She didn't flinch, didn't reach out. She just looked at the cat. And the cat, trained for stillness, protector of silence, curled against her leg. She stayed until nightfall. And after she left, the cat returned to the spot by the western wall, again and again, for days. You see, until that moment, the cat had believed it served a place. It did not know her name, but it remembered her absence. And every time someone came to the temple after that, the cat watched differently. So the cat became something else that day. It's not just a watcher, not just a guardian, but a listener of silence, a witness to need.
The temple was never meant to last forever, but stone, as it often does, refuses to forget. You had walked these paths 1,000 times, but walking with new eyes is not the same as walking with old purpose. Before, each step had been about stillness. Placement. WATCHFULNESS. Your steps were soft inquiries. Listening, not just to sound, but to weight, because stones carry things, and some stories do not float upward in incense, or vanish in bells. They settle. They press down. They become part of the floor. You wandered into the oldest parts of the temple, not the polished courtyards, not the rooms where the novices cleaned daily, but the back corridors, the forgotten corners, the thresholds worn down not by feet, but by longing. There was one stone near the western stair cracked, uneven, slightly, darker than the rest. You'd stepped over it for centuries. But today, you stopped. You placed your paw against it, and something in you stilled, not in silence, not in reverence, because this stone remembered, not just footsteps, but trembling, not just presence, but hesitation. It had once held the weight of someone who didn't know if they belonged, and it had held them anyway. You moved on. Another stone, near the washing basin, smoothed to a crescent from where robes had knelt, elbows had rested, tears had fallen without permission. The cat walked differently now. Each step was a memory, not its own, but shared. And that, you realized, was what made the temple sacred. Not the scrolls, not the relics, not the offerings, but the people who had walked it while breaking. Who had come in pieces. And left only slightly more whole. There was a spot beneath the alcove where the roof dipped. Low, too low for the monks to stand. You had curled there many winters ago. You had thought it merely warm, but now you could smell it. Candle wax melted in grief, sandalwood faded by repetition, the faint iron scent of dried blood. Someone had come here to choose. To stay, or to leave. To believe, or to stop. To survive, or not. The stones had felt it all. They did not judge. They only remembered. And for the first time, you felt less alone in your witnessing, because the stones had witnessed too, all those who came carrying shame too heavy to speak, those who whispered prayers not out loud, but into their palms, those who never prayed at all, but just breathed. You found one slab behind the old bell room, nearly overtaken by moss. The moss, you noticed, grew in patterns, not random. Circled out, almost like rings. You placed your body over it, aligned, your spine with its shape, and your breath slowed, because beneath that stone, someone had waited. Not to be seen, not to be saved, but to stop pretending. You wondered how many had sat here, just to be allowed to fall apart, to exhale without needing, to become holy first. You stayed a long time there, not watching, not guarding. Just remembering with the stones, letting their memory fill your silence. And when you finally rose, your paws moved without thought. Not in routine. In respect. The stones had been faithful witnesses. And now, so were you. As twilight turned the sky to ink, you passed the main courtyard where pilgrims sometimes left coins. The coins had been gathered long ago, but the indentations remained. Circles of trust, of last hopes. Of I dash of dash nothing dash, but dash this dot. You sat there, not out of habit, but because your own story had begun to find gravity dot not in the sacred, but in the overlooked. And you understood then, to be part of a temple is not to be holy dot, it is to be honest. And the most honest things are not the rituals that echo. They are the memories that linger dot, the hands that trembled dot, the footsteps that faltered, the breath that dared to say, I don't know if I belong. And the stones that replied, you are already here. For as long as you remember, the old monk never spoke to you. He never called your name, never offered a greeting, not even the soft, reverent coo some monks gave you when they passed by your guarding spot near the incense gate. He never touched. You never fed you, never looked into your eyes for more than a flicker of acknowledgement. You often wondered if he even knew you existed. But he did. He always did. He was the one who opened the meditation hall's sliding door with 2 fingers, curved like leaves, never letting it slam. The one who never stepped near the crack in the wooden floor you loved to nap beside. The one who once, without a word, placed a threadbare cushion exactly where the sunbeam fell. Just once, then never again. Like he didn't want you to feel observed. He had a way of moving through the world like water, without demand, without imprint. But you, the cat who never slept, noticed everything. You thought his silence meant disregard. But it was attention. So profound it had no need to speak. His room was the smallest in the temple. Tucked between the sutra archive and the worn path to the bell tower, its sliding door made no sound. No one lingered there. Monks passed it like a breath they forgot to finish. But you went sometimes. Sat just outside the door, back turned toward the world, like a shadow waiting for no one. Inside, 1 cup, 1 robe, 1 scroll, and a single white stone. He had arranged the world so finely that even the air felt intentional. He never left crumbs, never misplaced a thing. His presence was like that of wind circling in still chambers, silent but reshaping the dust, imperceptibly moving. The world back into balance. He was not indifferent to you. He was empty enough to include you. You had guarded this temple for so long, worn your role like fur, invisible yet ever present. You thought you had to earn love by doing. That devotion came through attention, through care, through speech. So when the monk said nothing, gave you nothing, you assumed he gave you absence. But silence is never just silence. Silence can be protection. It can be awe. It can be a vow. Years passed, and still, he said nothing. But once, in the dead of winter, when your paw was bleeding from temple tiles that cracked under frost, he left a bowl of warm water just beyond the edge of your usual path. Not close enough to make you feel needy, not far enough to miss. It steamed like breath. He never looked back to see if you drank. That's how you knew it was love. Old age doesn't come to monks as it comes to others. It approaches gently, as if not to disturb the breath they've spent decades refining. Still, you saw it, the way his steps shortened, the way his spine, once so straight it made brooms look disrespectful, now bent in quiet apology to gravity. He began missing the morning bell. He stopped sweeping the steps, though he used to insist it wasn't for cleanliness, but clarity. And one day, his cup remained unwashed by evening. The temple noticed. The wind stilled near his window. The birds, usually loud with gossip at dawn, chirped softer when near his room. And you, the cat who never slept, took your post outside his door, not to guard, but to bear witness. He no longer walked. He lay on his mat, thin as a reed, eyes closed like someone halfway through a question. Others came, folded prayers near. His feet wept discreetly behind sleeves. They whispered thank yous, chanted mantras, placed folded cranes of rice paper near his pillow. But you never entered, not until the seventh night, when all had gone to rest and the incense had thinned. Into shadow, you padded in without a sound, sat beside his unmoving hand, and then, as if called by a silence only cats and the dying can hear, his eyes opened. He turned to you, Dot, and for the first and last time, he spoke. Asterisk. Thank you, he whispered. That's all. 2 words, smaller than. The room, but heavier than all the years of silence. You blinked. You didn't move closer, didn't purr, didn't need to. He hadn't spoken to you because he needed to speak to the role you thought you had to be. But now that the role had dissolved, his and yours, all that remained was presence. And presence needed no explanation. His eyes closed again, and that was his last breath. Asterisk monks burned incense. The abbot rang the death bell. Sutras echoed through corridors. But you didn't attend. You returned to the edge of his room, lay there in the fading warmth of his absence, and didn't move for 3 days. Not because you were grieving a monk, but because you had misunderstood love. Asterisk later, when others spoke of him, they said, he was a man of discipline, of restraint, a seeker of stillness. But you knew the deeper truth. He was a mirror, polished by silence. He never spoke to you because you didn't need more noise. You needed space, and space is what he gave you. Day after day, season after season, Dot. How he taught you the one thing you could never learn through guarding. That presence is the purest form of love. Asterisk. You used to believe your vigilance was sacred. You believed the temple needed your sleeplessness, your unbroken stare at the gate, your relentless patrol of the shadows. But now, as you curled into the same cushion he once quietly placed for, you realized something shattering. You weren't guarding stone. You weren't protecting a place. You were protecting longing to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be chosen. But he saw you, every moment, chose you without choosing, loved you without praise, without demand, without need to explain himself. Now that he was gone, you didn't feel abandoned. You felt full. Asterisk, the temple looked the same. Wind through prayer flags, steam rising from morning rice, footsteps echoing across the stone floor. But something had changed inside you. You were no longer waiting, not for attention, not for permission, not for recognition that he had seen you. And that was enough to rest. For the first time since your paws touched this sacred earth, you curled beneath the altar and closed your eyes. Not because you were tired, but because you were no longer alone, Dot, and in your sleep, you dreamed of silence. The empty kind, the kind that holds. You sat still for so long you mistook stillness for being, but now you feel your breath, and it frightens you, because what moves can break, and what breaks can feel. Asterisk, it began with a crack, a hairline fracture in the bronze incense burner beneath. The Bodhisattva statue. You noticed it one morning, a thin, crescent-like scar, no wider than a whisker. No one else seemed to see it. You sat before it for hours. You had sat before many things, doors, shrines, pilgrims. But this time was different. You stared until the crack began to speak. Not in words, but in resemblance, that it looked like you. Worn, split in silence, holding burning offerings that were never your own. You touched it with a paw, Dot. It was cold, Dot, and in. That coldness, something ancient stirred, not memory, but realization, Dot, you had become what you guarded. Hard, unchanging, resilient, but no longer alive. Asterisk, that afternoon, the mountain wind returned, rougher than usual, pulling prayer flags from their knots. A monk reached for a fallen flag, slipped, and scraped his elbow. Nothing grave, but your body reacted as if it were a call to war. Dot, your fur rose. Your breath shallowed. You darted forward, yowling, tail bristled, claws half extended. The monk paused, startled by your alarm. He bowed to thank you, though you'd done nothing of use. And yet, even after he left, your panic didn't fade. You sat, trembling. Why had your body reacted like that? There was no enemy. No danger. Just a wind and a fall, and your old habit of protection. And suddenly, that habit felt like a prison. Asterisk that night, dreams came, vivid, undeniable. You saw your younger self, small, soft, afraid, a kitten left near the temple gates in a reed basket, cold, crying. You had forgotten this image, buried it beneath years of ritual, silence and incense smoked out in the dream. No one came for hours, but when the gates opened, a shadow knelt beside you. Not a monk, not even someone who stayed, just a traveler who placed a crust of bread beside you and whispered, "You'll be safer here." Safer. That was the seed. Not love. Not belonging. Safety. And so you stayed. You mistook safety for purpose. You built a life from vigilance. You became the guardian, not because it was your nature, but because fear told you it was the only way to survive. Asterisk on the second night after the dream, a new cat arrived, not part of the temple's quiet, not part of your rules. She was dirty, loud, a scraggly orange thing with a crooked left eye that blinked out of sync with her right. She sauntered past the bell tower as if she owned it, rubbed against the offering box, climbed onto the sacred altar. You hissed, bared teeth, leapt down in a silent fury. But when you cornered her behind the stone lanterns, she looked at you, not with fear, but curiosity. "Why are you so tense?" she asked, blinking off beat. You stared, unsure how to answer. She tilted her head. "Do you think the gods are afraid of you?" Your silence was all the answer she needed. She laughed, loudly, obnoxiously. "You poor thing," she purred. "You've confused stillness with devotion." And with a flick of her crooked tail, she was gone. The words clung to you. "You think the gods are afraid of you." It echoed in every chamber you passed, every shrine you checked, every monk you tried to shadow as they cleaned the floors. You realized something you had never dared admit. The temple ran without you. The bells rang, whether or not you watched them. Monks meditated with or without your silent surveillance. The flowers bloomed. The incense curled. The stars returned every night. You had made yourself into a statue. And statues are easy to honor, but hard to love. Asterisk. It wasn't dramatic. You didn't shatter like porcelain or scream into the sky. You simply collapsed beneath the body tree, where the dirt smelled of sandalwood and ash, and wept. Quietly, desperately. Because for the first time, you weren't guarding anything. You weren't needed, and the terror of that emptiness rushed in like a tide. Who are you, if not the one who watches? What are you, if not the one who serves? You pressed your face into the earth, hoping it would swallow the questions whole. But the earth, like the gods, remained still. Patient. Waiting. Asterisk when the sobs quieted. You lay there, eyes wide, ears flicking only slightly in the night breeze. You listened, not with your body, but with something deeper. And from the cracked incense burner, from the silence of the closed temple gates, from your own breath, something answered. You are not stone. It said. Not in words, but in certainty. You are not this stillness. You are not this fear. And then something harder to accept. You chose this role, but you can choose again. The next morning, you tried to return to your old post by the gate. You sat there for hours, but the stillness felt hollow. You no longer believed in the role. And so the silence no longer honored you. It imprisoned you. You left before the sun dipped behind the western ridge. The wind no longer felt like warning. It felt like permission. Asterisk. You wanted to change. But another voice, older, sharper, clawed at your ribs. If you stop guarding, you're selfish. If you rest, others will suffer. If you leave the gate, who will protect the sacred? You paced the edge of the koi pond for hours, tail lashing, ears twitching, arguing with your own shadow. Then you saw a child, one of the pilgrims, laughing as the crooked eye stray rubbed. Against her legs, no protection, no silence, just presence. And the temple didn't collapse. Asterisk. It came without warning. You were watching the incense spiral in. The wind, not guarding, just being. Your breath slowed. Your ears stopped scanning. Your body softened, and suddenly, there it was. A heartbeat, not just in your chest, in the sky, in the trees. In the bowl of rice, a monk carried past you without notice. You felt alive, not useful. Not vigilant, just alive, It was terrifying. And it was beautiful. You closed your eyes, and for the first time in years, you didn't fight sleep. You let it take you. Not because the temple was safe, but because you were. Asterisk. It was late in the afternoon when you saw her again. The same girl. The one from years ago. The one who came with no offerings, no chanting voice, only tears and silence. You remembered her, though her limbs had grown long and her shadow stretched. Further now. Her hands were still empty. She walked into the temple, alone, no parents. No monks guiding her, just her. She stopped near the cracked incense burner, the one you once stared at for hours, the one whose fracture whispered truth into you, and sat, cross-legged, back straight, palms open. There was no prayer on her lips, but the quiet around her deepened, like the world wanted to listen. You padded near, unsure why. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was her stillness. But it was different from yours. You had become still because you were afraid to move. She was still because she trusted she didn't need to. You curled beside her, not as a guardian, not as a symbol, but as something simpler, something real. She didn't reach out. She didn't speak. But you felt her breath steady beside yours. And you wondered, what if presence was enough? Asterisk. For weeks after, your old routines collapsed like unvisited shrines. You stopped pacing the perimeter at dawn. You no longer curled into your sentry posture near the west gate. You didn't interrupt the wind's movement or watch the clouds for signs of intrusion. At first, it felt like falling, like being adrift, irrelevant. But something curious happened. The sun still rose. The monks still lit incense and swept the stone corridors. No disaster arrived. In fact, some monks began smiling at you, not in reverence, but with something warmer, more familiar. One young acolyte even dared to brush your back with his sleeve. You didn't flinch, didn't need to defend your sacred silence anymore. The temple did not fall apart in your absence, but your heart. Your heart began to reassemble itself. Asterisk. The crooked eye stray came back again, this time with two others. A ginger kitten who limped slightly, and a half-deaf gray tom who seemed to always walk one step behind. They weren't graceful. They broke things, knocked over a vase near the offering basin, climbed a scroll shelf, chased moths during zazen. You felt your old instincts rise, the urge to hiss, to reestablish order, to mark territory. But something inside you whispered, let them stay. So you did. They weren't disciplined, but they were alive. The monks didn't chase them away. And for the first time, the temple rang with laughter, not just chanting or solemn breath, but the open-mouthed laughter of people watching. Kittens tumble under the bodhisattva's gaze. Perhaps sanctity didn't require silence. Perhaps some things were sacred because they were chaotic, uncontained. UNTAMED. Asterisk. It happened again. The great bronze bell at the top of the mountain steps failed to ring at morning meditation. Last time this happened, it launched you into an existential unraveling. But this time, the silence was met with quiet acceptance. The monks kept meditating. The sky still pinked at the edges. No one panicked. And you didn't sprint up the steps like before. You watched the stillness unfold. How no one seemed less whole, because the ritual had broken. And then, after some time, a novice quietly walked to the bell, rang it once, not to correct the silence, but to acknowledge it. A soft tone floated. Through the temple grounds. Enough. No urgency. No correction. Just presence. And that bell, that one imperfect, unpunctual chime, rang more clearly than any before it. You had never dared before. The meditation hall was for them, the robed, the disciplined, the ones who shaped breath into clarity. You had walked past it thousands of times. Sometimes you lingered at the edge, but never entered. This time, you did. Not as an interloper, not as a guardian. You simply walked in. No one stopped you. You found an empty corner near the scroll wall. Sat, waited. You didn't try to mimic the monk's posture. You didn't pretend to understand their chants. You just breathed. And to your surprise, it was harder than guarding. Because sitting without defense meant meeting yourself. You watched your own thoughts like wind through bamboo. Do they notice? Me? Am I worthy here? Will someone chase me away? But no one did. One monk even opened an eye and smiled, as if to say, yes, you too belong. You stayed until the bell rang again. This time, on time. You stood slowly and left with something. Softer than pride. Dignity, perhaps. Or maybe peace. The rain came heavy one night. Not the gentle mist that usually danced around the mountainside. This was torrential. Thunder split the sky. The roof above the archive dripped. You used to fear these nights, not because of the rain, but because of what might be forgotten if you weren't watching. But now, you curled into the alcove behind the tea room and let the sound pour over you. The stray cats huddled near you, their eyes wide, their bodies pressed close. The crooked-eye one shivered. You lifted your tail and wrapped it around her back. She didn't speak. She just settled. You looked out at the storm. And for the first time, didn't feel the need to outlast it. You could simply witness it. And trust it would pass. One evening, you realized something simple and strange. You were hungry. Not the polite kind of hunger you learned to suppress. The real kind. Your belly ached. Your mouth watered. For years, you had eaten in rhythm with ritual, slipping bites when no one noticed, feasting only when no offering required your presence. But now, you walked to the kitchen corridor while the monks were preparing rice, and you, me owed. Loudly. A novice looked up, surprised. You meowed again. He laughed, startled, delighted, and placed a bowl down near the door. You didn't wait for ceremony. You ate freely, sloppily. You didn't apologize. You were alive. Alive things hunger. And there was no shame in that. There was a boy. You'd never seen him before, who entered the temple with a bundle of scrolls in his arms and a look of profound confusion. He didn't bow correctly. He spilled his offering. His prayer mat was crooked, but his eyes were searching for something he didn't yet have words for. You sat beside him, not as a guide, not as a sage. Just beside him. He noticed you, gasped softly, reached out a hand, then paused, waiting for permission. You leaned in, let his fingers brush your cheek, and in that moment, he didn't ask for anything, but everything in him was praying. You had spent years witnessing prayers, offered to gods. But this silent reaching, was the truest one you'd ever felt. It wasn't planned. The crooked-eye stray had caught a moth, flung it upward, leapt after it, and landed in a mess of falling pebbles. You chased after her. Not to stop her. To join her. Your paws moved freely. You darted between the bells and the incense bowls, into the garden, through the puddles, your body, light and loose in ways you had never permitted before. One monk spotted you, not with disapproval, but with awe. You danced. You leapt. And when you stopped, panting, dripping, dirty, you were the most sacred you had ever been. That night, as you lay beneath the temple eaves, fur damp, tail twitching in dreams, something whispered through your chest. Not a voice, not a command, just a knowing. You are not stone. No one needed you to be still forever. No one asked you to carry everything. You were allowed to soften. To hunger, to rest, to question, to change. And if you chose, just maybe, to love. You, the cat who never slept, were finally becoming something else. Not less sacred, not less devoted, just more alive. And tonight, the moon did not need guarding. It needed company. So you lay beneath it, not as stone, but as soul, and let it keep watch over you. You are not stone. You are not the silent altar, or the incense smoke, or the cracked bronze that catches prayers. You are not the role you were given, or the fear you inherited. You are the breath beneath it all. Can breath, unlike stone, can move. It can rest. It can love. And tonight, it did. You sat because no one needed guarding. But you stayed because something inside you began to bloom. It was a cushion. Nothing more. Threadbare. Pressed down by time. Faint traces of saffron and smoke in the fabric. You had passed it 1,000 times, tucked beneath the Bodhi altar in the Eastern Meditation Hall. Once you might have ignored it, too focused on patrol. But now, the cushion called to you like a memory you'd never lived. You approached, circled it once, and without thought, sat. Not to guard, not to watch. You sat because you wanted to. And in that moment, the temple stopped holding its breath. It exhaled, as if it, too, had waited for this. At first, your body twitched. Not from discomfort, but from withdrawal. Stillness had always meant tension for you. The kind soldiers wear behind their eyes. But now, you weren't a soldier. You weren't even a guardian. You were just a cat. And the stillness felt different. Not brittle. Not sharp. It was soft. Like water. It wrapped around you like a shawl, spun from old songs. And as you let your breath deepen, the silence shifted. It didn't grow louder. It grew deeper. In that first deep silence, a vision came, not a dream. Not exactly. You blinked, and the world shifted. You were no longer in the temple. You were in a forest made of feathers. Each tree shimmered with iridescent plumes. Wind carried no sound, only vibration. And from above descended a creature, like a cat, but winged, with talons that glowed faintly gold. She looked at you. Smiled. And said only this: stillness is not the absence of motion. It's the reunion with all you are. Then she disappeared, feather by feather, until the wind wore her like a cloak. You blinked again. The temple returned. But now, something new lived in your chest, something vast and shining and unnamed. As the days passed, you kept returning to the cushion. Not every day, not for duty. But when your body asked, each time the stillness changed. One morning, you sat and listened to the rain, not with ears, but with skin. Another time, you felt your breath drop so low, it touched something beneath the bones. That was when the second vision came. You were in a cave beneath the earth. No light, no echo, only breath, your breath. But as you exhaled, the stone walls around you exhaled. 2. And then the stars. You realized the cave was not underground. Dot it was inside you, and everything inside was listening. Asterisk the crooked eye stray stole rice from a monk's bowl again. The kitten broke a sacred cup. You watched, you didn't correct. Didn't flinch. You stayed on the cushion, tail curled. Because the world didn't need fixing, Dot. It needed witnessing. The monks didn't scold the cats. They laughed, and you realized your presence didn't control peace, Dot. It invited it. Stillness wasn't a guardrail, Dot. It was a garden. Asterisk. During one long sit, your paws began to hum, Dot. The room blurred. Your ears shifted, and then you saw it. A cup, cracked, empty, sitting alone on a stone ledge. But when wind passed over it, the cup sang. Not a sound you could name, not melody, not chant, but something sure, Dot. It sang, because it was empty. Watch the cup shiver in the breeze, its song rising, unashamed, Dot. And then the wind turned. You returned to your breath, and for the first time, wept, Dot. Not from pain, Dot. From release, Dot. Asterisk. It startled you, Dot. You were deep in sitting when the eldest monk approached. He bowed, Dot. Not from politeness, but reverence, Dot. Then he sat beside you and whispered, "When did you become the temple?" You turned your head. Slow, Dot. Met his eyes. Didn't answer, because silence already had. Asterisk that evening, your stillness invited a third vision. A candlelight around you dimmed, though no wind touched the flame. From the corners of the shrine, shadows. Elongated, Dot. And then you saw yourself. Not your reflection, Dot. Yourselves. One shadow was the you who never slept. Tail rigid, eyes sharp, always listening. The other was the you who sat, now softer, present, breathing. They circled one another, then touched, Dot. And when they merged, you purred. Not in habit, not for affection, Dot. It was a vibration of wholeness, of return. Asterisk the next morning. You didn't rise for the sun. You were already sitting, and you realized the sun didn't need guarding, Dot. The dawn unfolded without fanfare, Dot. Birds sang without permission. A monk smiled in his sleep, and you felt no guilt. You didn't miss anything. You were something. Asterisk, the final vision came during a storm. Thunder shook the walls. The wind knocked offerings from their stands. Monks ran to secure doors. But you sat, and the vision came like a breath drawn in reverse. Dot. You were in a temple ablaze. Flames danced. Smoke spiraled, Dot. But in the center, unmoved, sat a cat. Her fur glowed with ember. Her eyes like coal. She was burning, but she did not scream. She became the fire, and in doing so, became light. You awoke, Dot. The storm had passed, and in your fur, a single ash, though no fire had touched the temple that night. Asterisk, it was no longer something you did. Stillness was a place, a room inside you, Dot. A mountain of breath, sky without sky, Dot. And every time you sat, you went there, Dot. Not to escape, Dot. To remember that beneath the roll, beneath the guard, beneath the name, you were not stone. You were the one who sat, Dot. Not for duty, but for love. Asterisk on the final night of this chapter of becoming. The moon rose without clouds, Dot. Round, bold, gentle, Dot. You sat where the monk once sat, Dot. The one who thanked you. In his final breath, you faced the open sky. Your tail lay still, and from above, you swore it. The moon blinked, Dot. Once, Dot. Not in illusion, Dot. In acknowledgement. You blinked back, and for once, there was no need to stay awake. That the world would continue, Dot. And your stillness was no longer a shield, Dot. It was a kiss. What if you were never meant to guard a place, but to become one? Asterisk, the bell tower needed no keeper. The incense bowls refilled themselves, without your gaze. The monks chanted without waiting for your cue. You walked the grounds, not from habit, but from curiosity, Dot. And for the first time in many moons, you felt something strange, not loss, but space, like something had been lifted. Like the air itself weighed less, but you didn't greet it. Instead, you paused beneath the lantern tree where your journey inward had begun, and laid down not to protect it, but to feel it. The bark against your back, the ground beneath your paws, the soft hum of the temple, not from stone, but from silence. And it was then you whispered, not with voice, but with presence. The temple didn't disappear. It just moved. You wandered beyond the bell gate that morning, not to patrol, not to check, just to walk. The path curved along a stream. You'd never followed it far, before always too much to do. But now, your paws moved without duty. Every rustle in the grass wasn't a threat, but a poem. Every breeze was a friend you hadn't met yet. You didn't know where the path ended. You didn't care. You were already home, not in bricks, but in breath. Asterisk midway along the trail, you found a tree, gnarled, ancient, its center hollowed. Out by time or lightning, you peered inside, expecting decay, but instead you saw offerings. Tiny things. Meaningless, maybe, to anyone else. A blue marble, a crumpled prayer ribbon, a paw print pressed in mud. The tree had become a shrine, not because it was holy, but because it wasn't trying to be. It just held what others placed in it, without clinging, without claiming. And in its openness, it had become sacred. Just like you. Asterisk that night, you didn't return to the temple walls. You slept beneath the stars. No roof, no bell, no shrine, only sky. And your body relaxed in ways you didn't know it could. You didn't flinch at the sounds of night. You didn't listen for danger. You just lay there. Breathing. DREAMLESS. Free. Asterisk you were sitting beneath the hollow oak again, when the mouse appeared. Tiny, trembling, brown as old acorns. You expected it to run, but it DIDN single quotes T. It approached slowly. Reverently, you locked eyes, and then it did the strangest thing. It bowed. Head to earth. Paws folded. You blinked. It didn't ask for safety, that it didn't offer worship, that it just sat beside you, still, trembling, breathing. And for the first time in your life, you blessed without blessing. You offered nothing except your being. The mouse stayed until the sun crept higher. Then scurried off, lighter somehow. Maybe the blessing had worked. Or maybe, just maybe, stillness had changed you both. Asterisk a week later, a girl arrived on the path, dragging her feet. Her sandals were worn, her hair unbrushed, her satchel mostly empty. You watched from the branches, tail curled. She didn't notice you at first. She walked in circles, muttered to herself. I thought this was the way. I thought there'd be something here. You dropped lightly to the ground. She startled, then stopped. Something in your gaze held her. She sat beside you, didn't speak again, just breathed. And after some time, she opened her satchel, pulled out a stone, plain, smooth, gray. She placed it on the path, then rose. Smiled. And walked on. She had not found the temple, but perhaps she had found enough. Asterisk more came, not in droves, not pilgrims in robes, just people. A boy with no shoes who drew mandalas in the dirt. An old man with a flute that played only one note. A mother carrying silence in a bundle of cloth. They sat with. You walked past you. Wept near you. You didn't speak, but you noticed something. Each time they left, they bowed not to a statue, not to a gate, but to you, because you had become something sacred. Not a wall, not a watcher, but a threshold. Something you crossed not to enter, but to return. Asterisk one night, while watching your breath beneath the open sky, you saw it. A second moon. It hovered slightly. Above the real one, faint, shimmering, translucent. You blinked. It remained. You reached up a paw and touched. Nothing. But in your chest you felt warmth bloom, and a voice, not with words, but with knowing, whispered, there are always two sanctuaries, the one you stand in, and the one that lives inside you. When you blinked again, there was only one moon. But the second one never really left. It had simply gone home, to the place behind your ribs. Asterisk, it was subtle. You walked the muddy path after a soft rain, but the earth held no mark. Your paws were clean. You turned, confused. No trail, no dent, no ripple. You walked again, slower this time, still, nothing. Not even the grass bent. And that's when it hit you. You are no longer moving through the world. You were moving with it. The earth did not need to remember you to know you. You didn't need to leave a trace to have been present. You had become something else. Something like wind. Or light. Or prayer. Asterisk, it was a joke at first. A novice from a neighboring temple wandered too far up the trail and spotted you, curled beneath the sun. She gasped. Clapped her hands and said, the Buddha is a cat. You blinked at her. She dropped to her knees, offered you a pebble, and began reciting her morning chants. You didn't stop her, didn't correct her, because who were you to say what the Buddha looked like? And wasn't that the point? That God might be pause, that silence might purr, that enlightenment could shed fur twice a year. Asterisk, one afternoon, a monk you knew well walked the path you now called home. He didn't speak, just sat beside you, breathed with you. Then another came, and another, until, over time, they stopped returning to the stone temple after morning meditation. They sat beneath trees, by streams, with you, without you, and the chants they sang sounded less like ritual, more like wind. You had not taught them, but your absence had become instruction. Stillness, after all, is contagious, especially when it's no longer used to prove anything. Asterisk, she came during twilight, red-furred, one eye milky, her gait broken but proud. You thought she was lost. But when you approached, she said, I've walked 1,000 roads and guarded every shrine from dusk till dawn. But now I rest, because the world didn't need me to watch. It needed me to see. She lay beside you, watched the stars rise. And slept without twitching. When she awoke, she didn't say goodbye. Just nodded. And vanished. Asterisk, one evening, a strong breeze swept through the mountainside. It wasn't violent, but it moved with purpose. It circled you once, then twice. Then brushed your whiskers as if to whisper, come. You rose, followed it past the stone steps, past the crooked bridge, past everything you'd once believed was boundary. The wind didn't lead you away. It led you inward until you stopped beneath a tree made of silence. Its leaves didn't rustle. They remembered. You pressed your paw to its trunk, and for the first time, you heard your name. Not the one given by monks, not the one whispered by pilgrims, but the one the stars had written before you ever guarded anything. Being. Eventually, you returned to the outer wall, not because it called you, but because you know. Longer feared it. You walked past its gate, into its rooms, and realized you didn't need them. They were beautiful, but you no longer belonged to them. You had become something portable, something boundless. You didn't live in the temple. The temple lived in you. In your eyes. In your silence. In your presence. You were sanctuary now. Wherever you sat, the sacred assembled. Wherever you breathed, the divine exhaled. Wherever you closed your eyes, God looked through your eyelids. Asterisk, your final vision came not in sleep, but in stillness. You were breathing gently when the walls disappeared. The trees folded into sky dot, and before you stood a house dot, no doors, no windows, just open space dot inside, where every cat you'd ever known, every breath you'd ever taken, every prayer never spoken aloud. You entered without crossing, sat without choosing, and realized you had never left the temple because you were never meant to guard it. You were meant to become it dot, and now you had. Asterisk, you closed your eyes beneath the lantern tree, and the temple pulsed within your chest worm. Vast, gentle dot, you were no longer the one who watched the gate. You were the gate itself, and through you, the world passed whole, unafraid, and finally at peace. It was the first bell of morning dot cool mist, a bird's second cry, and you stayed. You did not rise. You did not walk the spiral path. You did not perch beside the gate, as you had for years, chin high, eyes steady, still as stone. Instead, you watched the gate from a distance dot. It was just there dot closed dot unguarded dot undefended dot undu atched dot nothing collapsed dot no storm, no stranger dot no sacred fire dimmed. The gate had not needed you, not because you were useless, but because it had never been broken. You exhaled one long, low breath, and felt a strange softness curl inside your ribs, not relief. Not grief. Permission. Asterisk. Late that afternoon, a traveler appeared. Dusty coat, kind eyes, no urgency in his step. He walked the path toward the temple. He did not bow. He did not wait. He simply passed through the open gate. You watched. Your body tightened, a reflex old as bone. But then, you didn't move. You didn't stop him. You didn't even call out. And when he vanished beyond the outer garden wall, you realized nothing had been taken, because what is sacred cannot be stolen, and what you truly are cannot be guarded. Asterisk. That night, you dreamt but not of danger. You dreamt of the gate. It walked on two wooden legs, dragging its hinges through wildflowers. It yawned, stretched, and said, "I'm tired of being watched." You followed as it strolled through valleys, past candlelit fields, up into misty hills. It sat beside a cliff and stared at the stars. "I was never meant to be a wall," it said. "I was meant to be a question." You blinked awake before dawn, whispered, "So was I." Asterisk. Days passed. You no longer sat beside the gate at sunrise. You didn't test the hinges. You didn't nudge the stone that jammed it open. And you didn't feel the collapse you once feared. What you felt was breath, uninterrupted, round, whole. You passed the gate only when needed. And even then, you didn't check it. You greeted it like an old friend no longer burdened with secrets. You smiled. It creaked. And between you stretched something softer than duty trust. Asterisk. One morning, you woke to storml. IG to. The gate had blown wide. Rain rushed through the entrance, dragging leaves and mud into the inner garden. A young monk gasped. He ran to shut it. But you laughed. A real laugh. Quiet, full of fur and belly and wind, because the world had spilled into the temple, and nothing broke, nothing ended. The flowers drank. The mess. The courtyard glistened. Even the altar, streaked with rain, seemed to sigh in pleasure. Later that evening, the monk said the air felt new. You didn't clean the mud. You left it. A kiss from the sky. A sign the gate, once so feared unguarded, had let in something holy. Asterisk. He came through the gate barefoot. Old, bent like a willow, eyes filled with weather. He didn't stop at the shrine. He didn't light incense. He sat beside you on the path. You said nothing. Neither did he. After an hour, he scratched behind your ears, then whispered, "I lived 40 years on a mountain, built walls, dug moats, kept fires burning. Then one day I let a bird in. It sang. I wept. And I realized I had built a prison around a song. He stood, nodded, and left. Through the open gate. Asterisk, it happened slowly. You are no longer the edge between. Inside and out. You are not the line. You are not the watcher of the line. You are the breath between them. The silence after the door closes. The pause before it opens again. You weren't the keeper of eye. Boundaries. You were the witness of passage. That was enough. Asterisk, he was small, barefoot, cheeks pink with shame or fever or both. You saw him standing at the gate, unsure. Then he stepped forward. Timid. One paw print at a time. No guard stopped him. No bell rang out. He sat beneath the prayer tree and cried into his hands. No one told him to go. No one asked what he had done. And you stayed still, because healing does not require permission. Sometimes it just needs no lock on the door. Asterisk. This was your greatest fear, wasn't it? That if you rested, everything sacred would fall. The monks would scatter. The bells would stop ringing. The stars would forget how to rise, but they didn't. The temple stood, even when you slept through your own shift, even when strangers wandered in with bare feet and big questions, even when the gate blew open in the storm, and no one stood between the world and the shrine. The temple did not collapse. It sang, because your rest was not its weakness. It was its echo. Asterisk, a child ran past. Shouting, a dog barked. Someone dropped a bowl. You didn't rise. You didn't flick an ear. You didn't tighten your tail. Just sat. Like a mountain. Like a story that no longer required a hero. And the world flowed around you, not because it feared you, but because it trusted you had become part of it. You had nothing left to prove. You had everything left to hold. And you held it by letting go. Asterisk, one morning, you passed the gate and caught your reflection in a puddle at its base. You saw no guard. No sentry. No soldier. No statue. You saw a cat. Soft, eyed, breathing. Whole. And the puddle rippled, just slightly, like it was nodding. And you knew you weren't there to protect. You were there to reflect, not to hold back the world, but to show it how to open. Asterisk, at twilight. The gate swung wide in the wind again. You sat a few feet away, not to catch it, not to close it, just to be near. And as the last bell rang, a single blossom from the courtyard tree blew past you, drifted through the gate, and disappeared into the wide, waiting world. You didn't follow it. You didn't stop it. You let it go, because what once needed guarding now simply needed trusting. You thought love was action, but it was attention all along. Asterisk, he came barefoot, holding a drum that didn't play. The skin was split. The frame was bent. Still, he carried it like it mattered. You watched him sit under the Bodhi tree, the broken drum across his lap. He tapped it once. No sound. Again. Still. Silence. But he didn't weep. He didn't rage. He just sat with it. You could have fetched a new one. You could have nudged him away. But instead, you curled at his side. And together, you listened to the silence between beats. That day, he didn't leave with music. He left with stillness. And sometimes, that's the deeper rhythm. Asterisk, once, when others cried, you rushed in. You'd purr, lick, place your body between their pain and the world. You thought it kindness, but it was fear. Fear of seeing suffering. Fear of not solving it. Fear of sitting in a puddle too deep for rescue. One afternoon, a monk wept beside the cracked incense bowl. Didn't approach. You didn't climb into his lap. You didn't even blink. You just sat near, close enough to be felt, far enough to not distract. And when he looked up, eyes swollen, breath uneven, you didn't move. You just stayed. And in that quiet, you offered more than comfort. You offered witnessing. Asterisk, she was small, maybe 6. The ceremonial bell dragged behind her like a cart. Too large, too loud, too much. You'd seen the monks try to help her, ring it, lifting her hands, positioning her arms, correcting her breath, but it never sang for her. One morning, she came alone. You followed. She sat before the bell, didn't touch it, didn't try. She just looked. You sat beside her. The silence stretched long, and then she laughed. Soft, real, whole. I don't want it to ring, she whispered. I just want it to stay. You didn't answer, but your purr replied for you. Asterisk, a frog took up residence. Near the courtyard, stream. He never croaked, not once. Other animals noticed, they made suggestions. Try warmer water. Sing at dusk. Think happier thoughts. But the frog didn't budge, didn't defend, didn't explain. You passed by. Often. Sometimes you watched him. Sometimes he watched you. You never asked him to change. And one day, as the last sun dipped, low, he sang. Not a croak, not a sound, even, but you heard it. A silence so tuned it vibrated the grass. Some songs don't need ears. Just space. Asterisk, once. When someone faltered, you'd run in. When a prayer slipped from shaking hands, you'd catch it. When a breath stuttered, you'd press your body close. But now, you let them fall. Not out of coldness, out of trust. You saw a monk drop a bowl mid-dash. Walked on it. Shattered. He froze. Looked to you. And instead of retrieving the shards, you looked back, still, neutral, present. And then he laughed. Bent down, picked up one piece, held it to the light. Maybe now, he said, it's useful again. Asterisk, a child came, fevered and dazed. She crawled toward the shrine and lay flat on the stones. You felt it, every cell in your spine, rising to meet her pain. Every part of you ached to rush, soothe, fix, but you stayed. Not frozen. Open. She cried without. Hiding. Coughed. Slept. Woke again. And reached not for the incense, but for you. Your paw touched hers. And still, you offered nothing. Not magic. Not answers. Just warmth. And she smiled. Thank you for not making me better. She whispered. Asterisk, he came with a satchel of clay pots. Delicate. Gorgeous. Hand painted. And every day, he dropped one. On purpose, he'd say, this one is too proud. Or, this one wants to be broken. You watched, day after day. One morning, he sat beside you and sighed. I think I make them to drop them. You leaned against his thigh. He didn't cry. He didn't explain. But the next day, he brought no pots. Only tea. You drank together. And for once, he didn't break anything. Asterisk, that was the change, wasn't it? You stopped trying to make pain leave. You let it sit where it chose, stretch where it needed. You trusted it had wisdom. You didn't. You let sorrow have its corner of the shrine. You let grief ring the bell off key. You let longing dance with joy. The temple didn't dim. It deepened. Because now, it wasn't perfect. It was true. Asterisk, she brought a letter in her claws. Crumpled. Stained. I want to burn it, she said. Right now, here. You sat beside her as she lit the flame, watched her hands tremble, listened to the paper crackle. And when the ashes scattered on the breeze, she looked to you. Did I do it right? You blinked slowly. She nodded. And said, yeah, I guess that's the point. She walked away lighter, not because the past was gone, but because you didn't try to carry it for her. Asterisk, you thought compassion had teeth, that it leapt, saved, stitched, spoke. But now, sometimes compassion looks like sitting at the threshold, watching someone weep without handing them a towel, letting silence answer questions, holding space, not solutions, not running in when no, One asked that you weren't passive. You were vast. You weren't unfeeling. You were uncontrolling. You loved them enough to let them break. You trusted them enough to let them rise. Asterisk one twilight. A monk stood before the temple pond. He saw his reflection ripple. He turned to you and said, "You're not a cat. You're a mirror." You didn't respond. He wept just a little and sat beside you. You said nothing, because there was nothing to fix. There was only the stillness that said, "You're allowed to be this undone and still be beautiful." You didn't shed it. It stepped away when it saw you no longer needed armor. Asterisk, it came at dusk, not in a scream or storm, but in a whisper. You felt it before you saw it. That old posture, that tightness behind the eyes, that ancient ache of needing to be ready. And when you turned your head toward the gate, you saw yourself, but not as you are now, as you were then. Back arched, tail coiled like a question. Eyes sharp, always scanning for what could go wrong, It stood on the temple steps like a ghost who didn't know it had died. Asterisk, it didn't meow, It didn't blink, It didn't ask to come back. But you both knew why it was there. Not to be seen, not to be mourned, not rescued, not erased, It watched you breathe. Slowly, deeply, and for the first time, you did not try to become it again. You didn't salute. You didn't bow. You didn't reach. You simply watched, as it shifted from threat to memory to echo. Asterisk, the bell rang wrong. A gust tore through the gate, an unfamiliar scent floated in, and your body remembered. Your claws extended before your mind gave permission. Your ears flicked toward the sound before you could stop them, and you almost ran, almost crouched low, patrolled the perimeter, shouted at the wind. But you stopped. You blinked. You whispered, "Not everything needs guarding." And the wind passed through you like a hand through mist. You didn't need to guard yourself from yourself, not anymore, asterisk one morning. You found the shadow again. Curled beneath the Bodhi tree, it looked smaller, now, thin, less flame, more flicker. You sat beside it, not above, not against, beside, and in the stillness, you saw not a mistake, but a version, a necessary face, a chapter, not the whole book. You placed your paw near its fading shape and whispered, "Thank you for keeping me safe when I didn't yet know I was allowed to soften." Asterisk, there was once a statue in the temple, a fierce clay lion who guarded the prayer hall. But one summer, it began to crack, the monks debated. Some wanted to restore it. Others wanted to replace it. But one old monk said, "Let it break. Let us meet. What is beneath?" So they let it fall. And when the clay crumbled, they found something inside, a smaller statue. Not fierce. Not roaring, just a sleeping kitten. They had forgotten, the guardian was always meant to protect. Gentleness, not with power, but by reminding the world it existed. Asterisk, later that day, you strolled past your old patrol route. The corners where you once stood, the stones you once memorized, the scents you once studied like threats. You didn't avoid them. You didn't reclaim them. You just walked through. Like one walks through a childhood bedroom, with gratitude, with tenderness, with release. Asterisk, there was a monk you used to follow, strict, precise, always folded his robes the same way. He never spoke to you, but his silence had once made you strive, be straighter, be quieter, be more perfect. Now he was gone, but sometimes you still looked for his eyes in shadows. Still wondered if he'd nod in approval, this time. When you thought of him, you smiled, because you no longer needed his nod. You had given yourself one. Asterisk, you used to think you'd have to confront your old self, make a speech, earn a vow, rage at the years stolen by fear. But now you know some goodbyes. don't sound like thunder. They sound like birdsong in the next room. You let the shadow walk behind you. And one day, when you turned to offer it tea, it was gone. No. Ashes. No scream. Just the space where it had once stood. Now, filled with something else. Kalan presence. Asterisk. You caught your reflection in the water basin. For a moment, you saw it again. That tightness, that watching stare. But it wasn't real. It was memory. You leaned in. Closer. And saw it fade. And in its place, a cat. Breathing. At peace. Still. Still. Alive. Asterisk. You didn't erase who you were. You honored it. You didn't wear it, but you carried it, like a stone softened in a stream. You placed it near the incense bowl, offered no words, only a long, slow blink, because it had done its job. It kept you alert. Until you no longer needed to be, and now you could rest. Asterisk. Where the shadow once paced, flowers bloomed. Small, humble, wild. They did not need tending. They just needed time. You no longer walked that path, but you visited. Not to monitor, not to measure. Just to breathe. And each time you passed by, something new had grown. And you never once asked it to prove its worth. You simply whispered, I don't need you anymore, but I'm so glad you were here. And the wind carried your words like a prayer, meant only for the soul that once believed it had to be stoned to. Be strong. It wasn't the words that saved you. It was the space between them. Asterisk. You had once feared silence, not the quiet of night or the hush of snowfall, but the human kind, the one that lingered after a question, the one between breaths, the one after someone wept and didn't ask to be held. You had filled it with things, pacing, purring, gestures. Noise to make others feel less alone. But now, you listened. And in the silence, you heard something else. Not vacancy. But invitation. Not neglect, but presence. Silence wasn't nothing. It was room. Room for truth to unfurl. Room for others to meet themselves. Room for love to arrive unforced. Asterisk. She arrived just after the sun rose, hood-drawn, eyes rimmed with unspilled tears. She did not speak, not to the monks, not to the sky, not to you. She simply sat, for hours, hands clasped, shoulders trembling but still. You approached quietly, your paws making no sound, and you sat. Not beside her, a few feet away, just far enough for her silence to keep its shape. Birds sang. A breeze slipped through the bamboo. Still she said nothing, until, as dusk curled over the temple walls, she placed a small stone on the prayer bench and stood. Then she looked at you. And in her silence, you heard everything she couldn't yet say, and it was enough. Asterisk. It was a temple bell. Massive, beautiful, ancient. It had not rung in 50 years. That many had tried, with mallets, with prayer, with fire, but it remained silent. They blamed rust, blamed the heavens, blamed old curses. One evening, a boy snuck in, thin arms, bare feet, fierce eyes. He sat below the bell, said nothing, and then he listened. He pressed his cheek to its side. And wept. When the monks found him sleeping beside the bell. They asked if he had heard anything. He nodded. Not sound, he whispered, but memory. The bell hadn't rung, but it had spoken. Only silence had heard it. Asterisk. It was a strange day. Monks came to you one by one. Not for blessing, but for answers. Should I leave the temple? Am I selfish for wanting joy? Do I still believe in anything? Each asked, expecting your gaze to offer a sign. A twitch of whisker, a tail flick, a paw raised like a sacred omen. But this time, you did nothing. You just looked at them. Without performance, without meaning, without noise. And slowly, they stopped needing an answer. They started hearing the question. itself. And that was always where the truth had been waiting. Asterisk, you found a prayer scroll torn, smudged, its ink smeared by what looked like tears. You knew the scent. One of the youngest monks. He had failed the ceremony, dropped the flame, spoken the words out of order. You found him kneeling under the cedar tree, face tight. He saw you. He expected comfort, expected your body curled on his lap. But instead, you sat near the scroll, looked at it, then looked at him, and stayed. His breath hitched. He didn't cry, but something opened, because your silence didn't push him toward healing. It simply let him stay broken for a little while longer. Asterisk, there was a garden where monks once told secrets. Each plant was said to carry one wish, but only in silence. A boy came one day, angry. He shouted at the trees, demanded they answer. The trees said nothing. He kicked the stones, threw soil. Still nothing. Then you appeared, sat near a single lily, and said nothing. He watched. And slowly, his tantrum softened. He knelt by the same lily. He closed his eyes. He whispered nothing into it. And the next morning, the lily had bloomed blue. No one knew how. But the monk said later, sometimes silence is the only language the sacred understands. Asterisk, you remember the first time silence didn't feel like absence. It was the day no one lit incense. The courtyard was bare. No chanting, no bells, no footsteps. You stood in the center of the temple. And for the first time, you felt welcomed. By nothing. You realized you weren't alone in the silence. You were the silence, and it had been waiting for you to come home. Asterisk, he came to give a sermon, but the words escaped him. He froze, looked out at the small circle of seekers. Panicked. Eyes searched for permission to flee. And then he saw you, sitting on the edge of the step. Still. Open. Silent. He breathed in and said nothing, just sat beside you for one long hour. And afterward, a woman approached him and said, that was the first sermon I truly heard. Asterisk, one evening, an old enemy came, not a person, not a beast, but a memory. The same tension that once ruled you. You watched it hover near the gate, like a fog, but you didn't rise, didn't fight, didn't fix. You simply sat beneath the moonlight and said nothing. Eventually, it faded, because silence has a way of dissolving ghosts, not through battle, but through welcome. Asterisk, no visitors. No monks. No wind. No messages. Just you, and the temple, and the silence between each breath. You didn't leave, didn't curl in a corner, lay in the center of the shrine. And for once, you heard the sound of your own heartbeat. You understood. You are not here to fill the silence. You are here to listen to it. Asterisk, it stood open one morning. A traveler arrived. She bowed. Paused. Looked around. No monk greeted her. No bell sounded. No voice called her name. And yet, she stepped inside. Smiled. Took off her shoes, placed her hand on the gate, and whispered, thank you for not speaking. I needed to hear myself. You, curled in the shadow of the lantern, did not stir. But if silence could nod, yours did. Asterisk, you didn't wrestle with it. You let it drift away like fog, revealing what was always beneath. Asterisk, for so long, your shoulders held the weight of the temple, the invisible mantle of guardian, the unspoken vow to watch, to guard, to never rest. You wore it like armor, like a cloak heavy with expectation, and you believed it was you, that this was your essence. But one morning, as dawn spilled soft light on the mossy stones, something shifted. You stretched, and the weight felt. Less. Not because you pulled it off, but because it simply slid, like fog melting off stone. No fight. No struggle. Just release. Asterisk, behind the temple, there was a garden you had tended since your earliest days. Watering. Pruning. Guarding from pests. You watched as one morning you forgot to fill the water bowl, forgot to chase the crow, forgot to pluck the weeds. And yet the garden did not wither. It bloomed, wild and free. Untamed. You realized the garden didn't need you, that needed you to let go. Asterisk. You found yourself in the meditation hall. No one asked you to watch. No ritual required your presence. No unexpected vigilance. You simply sat. No longer sentinel. No longer shadow. No longer role. Just presence. And for the first time, your breath was not shallow. Your heart was not a drum of duty. You felt something new. Freedom. Asterisk. Once there was a statue in the courtyard, a fierce guardian cat. Proud. Imposing. Over time, the statue cracked. Bits chipped away. Monks debated restoration, but the master said, "Let it crumble. Let the stone speak." One day, when the statue was almost gone, a small patch of moss had grown on its base. Soft. Green. Alive. The temple was not guarded by stone. It was protected by life. The roll did not vanish in a blaze. No grand surrender. No shouted farewell. It unraveled in quiet moments. In missed steps, in the ease of blinking slowly. In the softness of your tail, curling without command. You noticed you no longer flinched at every shadow. You didn't rise at every noise. You began to trust the temple to be itself, without your ceaseless guard. Asterisk. There was a monk who always passed you by, without a glance. He carried no fear. No questions. No burdens. One evening, you followed him. He sat by the river. Closed his eyes. Breathed deep. You sat beside him. You realized he carried no role either. Just being. And you envied him not. You understood. Asterisk. You looked at the ancient stones, felt the warm wood of the doors, smelled the incense drifting like memory. And for the first time, you saw the temple was not you. You were not the keeper of stone, nor the watcher of shadows. You were simply a cat. Breathing. Breathing. Asterisk. Letting go was not silence. It was a whisper, a sigh, quiet clearing. You felt the roll slip through your claws, felt it lift like mist, and when it was gone, you didn't feel empty. You felt more. Asterisk. The temple air was different. Freer. Lighter. You breathed deep, and the temple seemed to breathe with you. You saw the monks, smiled. The birds sing. The wind dance, and you smiled too, because you had learned sometimes the greatest strength is surrender. Asterisk. And still you remained, not as the guardian, not as the sentinel, not as the statue, but as yourself. A cat. Soft. Alive. Asterisk. One morning, fog rolled in. It wrapped the temple like a shroud. For a moment, the temple disappeared, but when the mist lifted, it was still there. Whole. Unchanged. Only clearer, because the mist had shown what was always true. The temple stood without you needing to hold it up. And you stood too. Asterisk. You were no longer the vessel. You became the wind carrying prayers without holding them. Asterisk. For years, you had felt the weight of every prayer, each whispered hope, every desperate plea, each offering laid at the temple's altar. You gathered them, all folded them close like fragile birds in your chest. You thought it your duty, but it became a burden, until one dawn, when the sky was a gentle pink, you breathed out and let go. Asterisk. A woman arrived one morning, eyes bright, but hands trembling. She knelt and placed a prayer scroll in your path. "Please," she said softly, "hold this." You looked into her eyes, but instead of taking it in, you simply sat. Still. Open. And slowly, the scroll slipped from your paws and floated away in the breeze. She watched, her breath catching as the prayer lifted toward the rising sun. Asterisk. Near the temple, a river flowed tirelessly. It did not hold the leaves, the stones, the fallen petals. It let them pass. You watched the water. Realized you were like the river. Not a container, but a current, a passage. An open channel. Asterisk, a child came with a folded paper. Crane, she whispered a prayer into its wings. She looked to you, eyes wide. You blinked slowly, and without reaching out, you allowed her hope to pass through your presence. The crane lifted in a sudden gust. Flew toward the temple's highest spire, and you understood you were not meant to keep the prayers. You were meant to carry them. Asterisk, one afternoon, the temple was still. No chants. No bells. Only the sound of wind brushing leaves. You sat quietly. And the prayer spoken. An unspoken flowed through you. Not caught. Not pinned. Just flowing. And in that flow, you found peace. A lantern hung broken outside the temple gate, its glass shattered. Monks tried to fix it, but the light flickered dim. You sat beneath it. Watching. And the broken light became a prism, scattering colors across the stones. The brokenness was not a flaw. It was a passageway for light to become many. You realized you had been carrying not just prayers, but fears, not just hopes, but griefs, not just wishes, but burdens. You let them flow through your fur, through your breath, your stillness, and the weight lifted. You were lighter. Freer. A monk approached, hands shaking, eyes full of sorrow. He placed his palms on your head. For the first time, he whispered, "I don't need to hold it all." You purred softly and let his prayer pass. At dusk, the temple's candles flickered. You watched the flames. As the wind blew, the flames danced. Some went out, others flared, and the smoke rose. You saw how the sky swallowed it, all. Unseen. Unheld. And you thought maybe prayers are like smoke. They rise, they travel, and they become part of the vastness. You stretched your body, felt the breeze ruffle your fur. And for the first time you were not a catcher, not a keeper, not a holder. You were the wind itself. Free. Flowing. Boundless. Prayer whispered on the temple steps. A breath, a hope. You did not trap it. Did not fold it in. You opened your paws, and the prayer slipped through. Not lost, not broken, but carried on the wind, carried by you. Fear had been your shadow, your companion through endless nights. But one night, you closed your eyes and found a silence deeper than dread. It was a night unlike any other. The temple, usually alive with the crackling of candles, the soft chanting of monks, and the distant ringing of the bell, fell into a profound stillness. The air thickened, as if holding a secret. You prowled the halls as usual, every sense alert. But something was different. No shadow lurked behind the columns. No whisper stirred the incense smoke. No tension gripped the air. The temple seemed to breathe slowly, steadily, holding its breath in a gentle pause. You curled. In the center of the prayer hall, your heart beating steadily, your gaze soft. You closed your eyes. For the first time in centuries, you slept without fear. In your dream. You were no longer a guardian. No longer a sentinel watch in the dark. You were light. Beam cutting through the shadows. A river flowing through stone. You walked through a forest of stars. Every one a point of light, a pulse of energy. The stars whispered a message. To transcend fear, you must raise your frequency. To raise your frequency, you must embrace the unknown as a friend, not a foe. You felt your fur shimmer with radiant warmth. The forest bloomed with color, sound, and life, and you understood fear only holds power when your vibration matches its frequency. There was once a monk who never spoke. His silence was both feared and revered. He wandered the temple grounds at dusk, his eyes closed, palms open to the fading light. The other monks whispered that he was lost in fear, trapped by his own mind. One evening, a young monk asked him, "Master, how do you overcome fear?" The silent monk opened his eyes, looked deeply at the young monk, and said, "Fear is a visitor. It is not your home. To overcome it, you must change the song you sing inside." That night, the young monk listened. He breathed deep, and he changed his song. You remembered the old lessons carved in the temple walls. Energy flows where attention goes. If you focused on fear, it grew. If you focused on love, peace, courage, it blossomed. You began to hum a different tune in your heart, a vibration of calm, a frequency of bravery. The shadows no longer chased you. They bowed away. You felt lighter. One night, a child entered the temple. Eyes wide, trembling, she whispered, "I'm afraid of the dark." You approached her quietly, sat beside her. You did not chase the darkness away. You did not promise safety. Instead, you curled beside her, a warm weight against the cold night. You closed your eyes, and she closed hers too. Together, you breathed. In the silence, together, you raised your frequencies. And slowly, the darkness softened. The rising sun and the falling fear morning light spilled over the temple roof. The child awoke, smiling. She no longer clutched the night like a chain. You watched her walk toward the gardens, unafraid, because she had learned the secret. Fear loses power when faced with rising light. You stretched and rose. Your own fear had fallen. You inhaled deeply, felt the ancient chains of fear loosen and break. No longer did you tremble at every sound. No longer did you curl beneath the weight of imagined threats. Your breath became a steady flame, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of dread. You knew now the only way to rise above fear was to raise your own frequency. To vibrate in harmony with courage, love, and peace. The wind swept through the temple, carrying stories. Stories of those who had faced their fears and found freedom. You listened. You remembered. You felt the pulse of those who had walked this path before you. The wind whispered, "Fear is the shadow cast by the light you refuse to see." And you chose to face the light. The temple gate creaked open. A figure approached, tall, quiet, a reflection of your own shadow past. You did not flinch. You did not shrink. You met the figure's eyes, and you saw not threat, but a mirror, the fear within you. The fear within all beings. You breathed, and the figure dissolved. You stood tall. That night, the temple was still. Your heartbeat was calm. Your breath deep. You closed your eyes, and you slept without fear, because you knew fear was not the enemy. It was a signal, a call to raise your vibration. To choose love over dread. To awaken. The dawn rose. Light spilled over the temple walls. The world was the same, but you were different. You were a beacon, a cat who slept in peace, a guardian not of stone, but of light. And as the temple woke, so did you. You believed your watch kept the temple safe, but what kept the temple alive was the love you never saw. For centuries, you believed the temple's fate rested on your shoulders. Every shadow held menace. Every silence screamed danger. You were its unblinking eye, its silent guardian. But slowly, a question crept in. Did the temple truly need you? You began to notice how the temple flourished, even in moments when you rested. The moss grew on stones you didn't clean. The birds nested in eaves you didn't watch. The incense burned softly, even when you slept. The temple was alive without you needing to hold it. There was a monk who never spoke to you. At first, you thought him distant, but one evening, he quietly placed a hand on your fur. No words, just a gentle, warm touch. And suddenly you felt it. You were loved, not for what you did, not for what you guarded. One day, You discovered a bowl of rice left, untouched. Not for you, but for the temple spirit. No one remembered who left it. No one expected thanks. Yet the offering remained, a symbol of unseen love. Looking into a pool of still water, you saw not a sentinel, not a shadow, but a being, a creature of flesh and spirit. Loved, not for duty, not for role, but simply for being. One dawn, the temple gate opened. You did not rise. You did not block. You simply watched, and the world entered. Freely. No harm came, only peace. You ventured beyond the temple. Days passed without your vigilance. Yet the gardens blossomed brighter. You understood. Love nurtures growth, not fear. The wind carried voices. Soft prayers of those who came before. They said, you were never alone. You were never needed as much as you thought. But you were always loved. You realized that love is not a task, not a weight to bear. It is a gift, presence. You curled beneath the lantern light. No longer a guardian. No longer a keeper. Simply a cat. Loved. Whole. Free. Closing image. The temple's heartbeat. The temple stands. Stone and spirit intertwined. It does not need you, but it remembers your love, and that love beats like a heartbeat beneath every stone. You no longer needed a name, no longer needed a title. You were spirit. You were love. You were the soft, gentle presence that stayed, and now you could finally rest. For centuries, names had defined you. Guardian. Watcher. Sentinel of the temple. Each word a chain, each title a weight. But as dawn spilled gold across the temple roof, you felt the bindings loosen. The names fell away. Not lost, but released. You are no longer bound by the story others told. Names are words. Words are sounds. Sounds are fleeting. You found a quiet deeper than language. A stillness beyond naming. Presence that needed no label. You were no longer the cat who prowled temple halls. You were spirit, light and shadow intertwined. You were the wind that stirred leaves. You were the warmth in a monk's breath. You were the gentle pulse beneath stone. Love does not ask for a name. It simply is. You had been love's companion all along, unseen but felt, silent but powerful. You curled beneath the ancient lantern tree, your fur warmed by its soft glow. You did not watch. You did not wait. You simply were. And now you could sleep. Not from exhaustion. Not from duty, but from peace, from knowing you were home. Your breath slowed. Your eyes closed. The temple breathed with you. The world hushed, and you slipped into dreams. Free. Loved. Complete. They may still call you guardian. They may still whisper your titles. But you know, you are beyond all names. You are pure being. You had given the temple more than protection. You had given it love. Presence. Acceptance. And now you gave yourself the gift of rest. The sun rose again. The temple stood. You slept. And in your sleep, a new story began. Closing image. The cat who sleeps beneath the lantern tree. A silhouette lies curled, not guarding, not watching, but at peace. The cat who no longer needed a name. The cat who finally sleeps.